Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, especially the first session of the day on a Saturday. Maria and I are really excited to be here to share some early findings from a study we've been working on, exploring student veterans' experiences with getting college credit for your military training. Before we dive in, we wanted to just do a quick overview of our session today. So first we'll do some quick introductions, then we'll give an overview of the study, who was involved, and then share some of our early findings. Just a quick note that the findings we're sharing here are the result of early analyses, so not final. We'll be publishing a full report with final takeaways later this spring, and just excited to share kind of early findings and what we're learning with you today. And then finally, we'll wrap up talking through your questions and reactions to what we're finding. We'll have some targeted questions for you at the end, but as we go through, please feel free to ask questions at any time. And we're especially interested in hearing how kind of what we've found tracks with your experiences and your feedback on how this information might be helpful to you. So please feel free to keep that in mind as we go through. And we'll do our best to answer your questions as they come in. All right, so before we jump in, we wanted to take a minute to introduce ourselves. So I'm Jessica Mason. I'm a researcher at the American Institutes for Research. We are an independent nonprofit research organization, and I'm the project director for this project, which we've been doing for about a year and a half now.
Hello, and I am Maria Pyrie. I'm also a researcher at American Institutes for Research. I am based in Chile, Chicago, which is my background, as a contrast to this Yosemite Park picture. And I am the survey lead and also had a big participation in the focus groups that we did last year.
Thanks, Maria. We wanted to share some non-headshot photos to remind us all of sunnier times. All right, so now that we've introduced ourselves, we'd like to hear a little bit more about you. So to that end, we have a poll. We have a couple questions that we'd like for you to take in a poll. So those will be on the right on your screen. You might have to scroll down a little bit to find it. But we have two questions for you. So the first is just kind of getting to know you. Which of these best describes your current position? So are you a current student veteran? Are you alumni, family of a veteran, or non-veteran student supporter, higher ed professional, or something else? And of course, feel free to use the chat to share anything else with each other as you go through the presentation. And then for those of you on the call who are current students or alumni, we're interested in which of the following best describe your experience with getting credit for your military learning. So I tried, but I didn't get any credit. I tried to get credit and received some, but not all of what I expected, or I tried and received all the credits I expected to receive. So I think the poll should be launched. You can find it on your screen, and we will pause for a minute just to let you all enter some responses. All right, so it looks like we were getting a lot of responses in the poll, and so we'll close and share the responses so you can see all together who's in the session. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a minute. All right, so it looks like a lot of you are actually higher ed professionals. And then current students, alumni students, some others. So a good mix of folks here with some different perspectives. So we'll be interested to hear, what your all's reactions are as we go through. And the second question. All right, so again, a pretty good mix here, but it looks like the largest portion would be those who tried to get credit and received some, but not all of what you were expecting. And I think you'll see as we go through that this is pretty similar to what we heard from all of you and from our participants in the survey. So I will share my screen again, just one moment. All right, so let's move on. Thank you all for sharing. And again, continue to use the chat and the platform to connect with each other and talk about, who you are and what you're doing here today. So as I previewed when we got started, we've been working on a study about understanding student veterans' experiences getting college credit for military learning, either through training or military occupations. And then our second goal beyond that was to take what we learn and share it with the field, especially to inform and support colleges and universities that are trying to better serve student veterans. So to do this, we conducted focus groups with 26 student veterans. Some of those we actually did, or many of those we actually did at NatCon, Maria did at NatCon last year in LA, just before everything changed. And then the rest we did virtually throughout the winter and spring in 2020. And then in fall 2020, we administered an online survey to student veterans. We had 486 people who took the survey. Many of those were SVA members. So we're really excited to have this chance to share back our early findings and to share that back directly with you all. We don't often get to present our findings back to those who, maybe some of those who actually participated in our studies. So this is a great opportunity for us. And we really welcome your feedback and questions as we go. Okay, so let's take a look at who took the survey. So first we're showing here the breakdown by branch. You can see 37% of folks were Army, 22% Navy, 21% Air Force, 16% Marine Corps, and 2% Coast Guard. And then the breakdown by rank is shown here on the screen. So as you can see from the two darker blue sections on the left, those enlisted ranks E1 through 7 made up most of the sample. Our respondents were mostly male, 68%, 29% female, and 3% other gender identities, or those who preferred not to answer. And finally, we have our breakdown by race ethnicity. Here we can see the majority of the sample identified as white. That was 65%. 7% of folks identified as Black, 6% Hispanic, 3% Asian, 1% Native American, and there were 11% of folks who identified as more than one race. So let's dive into what we're finding. So we'll walk through the findings today, sort of following the experience that a person might have from start to finish. So we're going to start out by taking a look at how folks get information about opportunities for getting credit for military learning. So broadly, we find most respondents knew that getting credit was an option. The most commonly cited sources of information, as you see from the chart, were military-based resources. These were things like career advisors, other senior military personnel, folks like that. Then we had campus-based resources, so often advisors, school certifying officials, folks who were working in veteran centers, and then people doing their own research. It was really common for us to hear that, I didn't get a lot of information from these other sources. I did my own research and I got what I needed. And we really think the most helpful information from what we heard seemed to come from people rather than from online systems or other kinds of information sources. So in particular, knowledgeable campus advisors, those that really knew something about the military, school certifying officials, campus veteran centers, and military career counselors were the most helpful. So people, which makes sense. And we share a quote here from someone who described support from an advisor who was very knowledgeable about the military. Sharing that was a really helpful experience because that person already knew kind of who they should speak to and where they should go. But we also heard there's room for improvement, which I imagine many of you would not find surprising. So especially with getting accurate information before enrolling in college, we did hear from folks that many didn't really know this was an option ahead of time. And one challenge that we heard about a lot was actually that messaging from the military about credit recognition wasn't always clear or supportive. So you can see from the quotes we put on the screen, I'll leave you a minute to read, that there were some challenges about getting that information before separating from the military. All right, and I will now pass it over to Maria to keep talking through our findings.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about choice factors, which is something that we discussed both during our focus groups and during the survey. And actually, a lot of the themes that came up during the focus groups, we try to ask about during the survey to see how it applied to the larger population. And choice factors was one of those questions. So these factors were based in part of what we got from respondents during focus groups. So when it came to the things that factored into picking a college or university, not surprisingly, most respondents cited academic reputation, the specific degree program offerings, and the location as the top factors. Whereas the option to get credit recognized for their military learning wasn't as important. We have it here as 48%, 47.7. Here we go. So here we're taking a closer look into this. So as we were saying, just under half of the respondents consider the opportunity to get credit for military learning in their decision. But actually, when they were asked for advice to other veterans thinking about college, many of them recommended looking into credit recognition options when picking a college, as they thought, in retrospect, as it was something important to consider after they had gone through the process themselves. And looking a little bit closer into the data, so those who say that getting their credit recognized was an important factor when choosing a college ended up receiving more of the credits that they attempted to get than those who didn't consider that as a factor. So the light blue bars are those who consider credit recognition as a factor when choosing a college, and as you can see, about 86% got some or all credit recognized, whereas of those who didn't consider that, it was 69%. All right. So now we're going to talk about the experiences with the process of getting their military learning recognized, which of course varied widely across and within colleges. And starting with the expectations that students had about getting their credit recognized, we found that 40% of survey respondents actually had no expectations. And of those who did have expectations, they largely were not met. Okay, so we got a more detailed picture at some of the reasons why the process of getting military learning recognized was so different for different students. And these next slides include some quotes from focus groups and open-ended responses from the survey that we thought exemplified well these differences. So, for example, not all academic programs have the same requirements in terms of prerequisites, which led to differences when trying to get the credit recognized. And I'll just leave a few seconds for everyone to read the quote. And of course, as we were saying, there is great variance across institutions, and not just between two-year colleges and four-year colleges, but also within the same type of institution, which is why some military students recommended looking into what the college will accept before applying, which is one of the quotes here at the bottom. The one at the top gets more about differences between community colleges and four-year institutions. Okay, and another source of variance was actually state policies. So, um, sorry, state policies that dictated how credits are recognized, such as the Texas Hazelwood Act, which is one of our respondents was talking about how this act guarantees that any service that you've done will get recognized by your college. Okay, and finally, and this came up as a recurrent theme both during the focus groups and the survey, having access to a dedicated veteran advisor or officer contributed to a smoother process, whereas those who didn't have access to such individuals described a more negative experience. And it looks like we're having some audio problems. So, Jessica, are you okay taking over?
Yeah, I will happily pick back up. So here we're looking at credits received. So this is actually going back to the poll that y'all participated in at the top. So when we're looking at how much credit folks got recognized, we see so 60 just to start, 69% of respondents attempted to get credit for their military training. So among those, most respondents got at least some credits recognized. That's the light blue section of the chart, 64%. Only 15% said they got all of the credits they expected. But when we look a little bit deeper, when it comes to the type of credit that folks received, only 27% got it applied toward their major. Most folks reported that they received credit for electives or general education requirements, which may be helpful, may not be, sort of depends on the person's program, but definitely not as many that were directly relevant to folks' programs. So of course, getting credits or not getting credits has an impact on academic experiences. And we wanted to understand kind of how people perceived that getting credits as having an impact on their credit recognition. So more than half of respondents said that getting credit or not affected the amount of time they expected it to take, the amount of time they expected it would take to complete their program. A lot of folks said it didn't have any impact. And fewer said it might affect the cost or their choice of major. And just to give you a little bit more context about sort of what it felt like for some of our respondents and what that experience was, we've included some quotes here that describe sort of both the positive and negative effects of how getting credits impacts the time to complete a program. So in some cases, you receive a lot of credits, like the top quote, that really, for this person, it cut off a whole year of time for that person to graduate. But for the person on the bottom who didn't receive as many classes or courses or credits that they were hoping for, they were saying they had to look into taking summer school classes to make sure things got covered. So it can go both ways, but definitely has an impact on time to degree. And finally, we wanted to share some findings on the effect that getting credit or not getting credit recognized had for students' overall experience on campus. So we looked into 6 different factors related to sort of what the research field calls sense of belonging, really trying to understand how military students perceived their campus environment and how well they thought they sort of fit and belonged on that campus. So when we asked them whether their experience getting credit for military training affected how they perceive different aspects of their campus environment, Nearly half of them said that it affected whether they would recommend the college to other veterans or service members. And that's definitely something that came through. Also in our survey, we asked a question at the end, just generally, what advice would you give to other students or other veterans thinking about going to college? And really this piece about making sure that they'll accept your credits did come through as an important piece of advice. So that, it affected whether they would recommend, and also whether they perceived that the college had the right resources for their needs, that faculty, staff, and advisors understood them, and to a lesser degree, whether they felt connected to the community. So we also found that although many people didn't have a lot of expectations around getting credits to begin with, when their expectations weren't met, when folks didn't get the credits that they expected they would receive, it often led to feelings of frustration, maybe a perception that the college didn't really care about them. And so we've left some quotes here that kind of talk about the different experiences that student veterans went through when trying to get their credit recognized, and how they tried to connect with their campuses. So one quote here kind of talking about, being forced to do courses or activities that were redundant, with those first-time students that were a lot younger and going through it for the first time, just really made this person feel, ready to throw in the towel, which is certainly not, I think, what most colleges are hoping would be the case. We also wanted to share some of the success factors and some of the things that really did make those folks who responded to the survey or focus groups kind of feel more like they belonged. And those folks shared that supportive campuses, connecting with the community, both the veteran community and non-veteran, and advocating for themselves were key supports. So we have some quotes here about how getting involved in different ways kind of helped folks feel connected. So getting involved with games, sports, and then the lower quote is sort of talking about getting connected with veterans groups, even if that is kind of not where folks wanted to identify, having a place where they can be around folks, be in the same room with folks who have similar experiences was helpful. And we don't have a quote here for this, but we did really hear that a lot of folks advocated for themselves. You can see in the top quote, I had to go out of my way to find that. So there's a lot of experiences that people shared with us about really going to bat for themselves in terms of, getting placed in the right courses, trying to get credit, trying to get involved. And that was a strength that a lot of the folks who participated in our survey brought to the table. And we share that, I think, both to highlight that as a strength and for those who might be from institutions listening, to know that we shouldn't leave it to students to have to figure these things out on their own, and that when we're thinking about providing supports and recognizing credits, keeping that in mind, that we're working with a group of students who are not the same as traditional aged first-time freshmen, yet not making sure that folks aren't left on their own to figure things out. All right, so that takes us to the end of our early findings that we wanted to share with y'all. And so we would love to open it up now for questions. We have a few questions for you on the screen here. Because a lot of you on this call or in this session are student veterans, maybe some of you or even those who participated in our survey or focus groups, we're really curious to hear about how this tracks with your experience. We're also curious for anyone on the call, what pieces of information you think might be most helpful for student veterans, any suggestions you might have for us when we're thinking about future studies and other questions to explore, and of course, any questions, reactions, feedback you have for us. So I'm seeing some questions come in the chat, and I will just start talking about them. And Maria, please jump in if I am missing anything. And yeah, keep the questions coming. So, okay, first question is, you mentioned that results will be available in the spring. How do we get the results? Our final slide, which I can actually put up now, we have our email addresses here and our website. So it will be posted to the website. If you're definitely interested in receiving the results of a copy of the report, you'd be more than welcome to email either one of us and we can add your name to a list that when we have it ready and posted, we can send you a message about that. We're expecting to have it published in late May. But yeah, please feel free to drop by our website or send us an email. We are happy to hear from you anytime. Okay, the next question, can you provide more details on what your inclusion criteria for the study was? Excuse me. So we were looking for either current student veterans or recent alumni within 3 years in an undergraduate institution. And that was basically it. So we got a lot of different folks, a lot of mostly 4-year institutions. That was one thing we didn't put on the slides and when we were describing the sample, but yes, current or recent alumni at undergraduate institutions in the US. Okay, the next question. Sorry, go ahead, Maria.
No, I was just going to read the next question because that actually, I think we have it in one of the slides. It's about whether the credits awarded actually counted towards their degree or not. And if I recall correctly,
yeah, I can go back to that slide.
I'm just trying to find it. Yes, it's slide 23.
Yep, so y'all should see the slide that she's talking about on the screen now. The question was whether we looked at whether students had an understanding of whether the credits awarded actually count toward their degree or not. So it says our policy, this is someone from the University of Dayton, is to only award credits that count, while other schools award a lot of credits by posting them to the transcript, even though they do nothing for the student. We find that first-time undergraduate students don't know the difference and will make college attendance decisions based on raw numbers of credits posting to transcripts, even when those credits don't advance the student an inch toward degree completion. So I'm really glad that that someone called this out. So I don't know that we got into this level of detail. It's possible that some of our focus group participants may have talked about this, but you can definitely see on this slide that this tracks. A lot of folks were receiving electives or general education credits. And when we heard from folks during focus groups, they did talk about how they often didn't receive credits that were super useful to them. I'm not sure we have great information about how much folks knew about that before enrolling, but I think it's a really great question that we should think about. The next question, can you share some of the study limitations for generalizing to the larger student veteran population? That's a great question. I think one limitation might be that a lot of our participants were SVA members, which is great. But in terms of generalizing, these are the perspectives of people who have selected in to participate, to be a member of SVA, to receive. So some folks who received the survey were those who had opted into receiving surveys and were part of a panel that SVA had identified. And so there may be differences between veterans who are not currently involved in organizations like SVA or other sort of veteran support organizations that might be having different experiences. I think another group that we wanted to capture and didn't have as much luck with was folks who had enrolled, folks who were not currently enrolled in higher education, but had been at some point. So people who may have stopped, taken a pause without completing a degree, and kind of what led to that being the case. I don't think we have a lot of great information about that. So I think those are probably two of our biggest limitations with this study.
And I would also mention we couldn't get as much information on students who were part of two-year institutions or who had experiences in two-year institutions. As Jessica mentioned earlier, most of our sample is made up of students who attended four-year institutions. And we got a glimpse that things are very different in community colleges in terms of credit recognition and the resources available. So that would be another limitation in terms of generalization.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Okay, next question. Have you all noticed a difference between highly selective colleges and other colleges in the number of military credits accepted? That's a great question, which we are actually exploring now, but hadn't done yet in time for this presentation. So we are looking at, we're looking at IPEDS data. So that's the, it's post-secondary education data that higher ed institutions are required to submit that gives us a lot of institutional characteristics. And so we are trying to look at whether there are potentially differences in our survey responses on some of those institutional characteristics, other services that they offer, those kinds of things. So stay tuned for that. If we find anything interesting there, it'll certainly be included in the report that we put out later in the spring. So it sounds like we have just a little less than 10 minutes left in the session. Please, if there are other questions that y'all would like to ask, or even if you don't have questions and you just have comments or feedback for us, we'd be more than happy to keep chatting. So I think, you know, we'll stay here and see if any other questions are coming in. But in the meantime, I will just, you know, put our contact information back up here and just wanted to extend again a thank you for all of you for being here, for asking a lot of really great questions and participating in our polls. And as we've been saying, you know, we'd love to hear from you if you want more information, if you have any additional questions, or if you'd like to have us get you on a list to receive that report. Okay, another question here. Do we have any segmented results between students in a vocational certification program, 2-year, or a 4-year program in terms of receiving credit? Okay, so in terms of 2-year and 4-year differences, as Maria noted, unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of folks from 2-year institutions such that we can make a lot of really great comparisons between the two. So I don't have a great answer to that question right now, but it's certainly on the list for future research. And I'm also seeing another question asking us to go back to a POC slide, but I have to apologize. I'm not quite sure which slide that person's asking for. So if you wanted to say a little more about that.
Is that
or
about
happy.
the racial breakdown?
That may be the case. Another question. So this is our race, ethnicity, background, if we're talking about people of color. Another question that came in, have you found any degree programs that are more likely to award credit? So I think we can answer this based on some folks' experiences that were shared during our focus groups. The different degree programs definitely had an impact on how much credit people got. One of the examples, I think we shared it on an earlier slide. Let's see.
Right before that,
academic programs. So an example that we heard frequently was related to specialized programs. So engineering schools came up a lot because they have really specific prerequisites that folks need. The credits don't always transfer. And this also came up, I think, in the context of, you know, expectations. So a lot of folks said, you know, I was pursuing a field of study that was very different from my military training. So I wasn't really expecting to get that much credit. In terms of the survey, we did not ask folks to report on their degree program, so we can't say, you know, more systematically than that, but it's certainly, or like which kinds of programs are more likely than others, but it certainly matters in terms of programs and requirements.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, what we heard mostly was which degree programs are less likely to give you more credit, which is those, as Jessica mentioned, that are highly specialized. And yeah, and also if your military experience has is more related to the degree program, of course it is. There's a higher likelihood that you will get more credit recognized. Okay, so the Air Force respondents.
So this question, and I think Maria, you can probably speak to this from the focus groups, was did you notice any difference with Air Force respondents since the Air Force has the Community College of the Air Force and doesn't rely on the JST? I'm wondering if that results in higher transfer credit acceptance or usability.
Yeah, so from the focus groups, what we heard is that it wasn't always recognized. Oh, point of contact slide, okay. It wasn't always recognized as academic credits the same way that previous college experience. So let me just read the question one more time. Did you notice any differences with Air Force respondents?
So in terms of the survey, that is something that we're still working on. So, you know, for these early findings today, we wanted to share with you kind of top line findings. But one thing that we're working on now is a lot of these kinds of different subgroup analyses. So we can break this out because we have information about folks' branch. We can take a look at these kinds of questions. I would say so far, we haven't noticed a ton of differences in terms of branch, at least differences that are statistically significant. But yeah, I mean, like Maria was saying, it did seem like the Community College of the Air Force degree wasn't always as recognized as folks had been told it would be.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I would say, since it came up earlier about, for example, getting differences between 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions, one of the problems that we have is because some of the numbers are smaller, so you know we didn't have as many 2-year institutions respondents, making any sort of breakdowns or differences wouldn't be statistically significant or as relevant because of the sample size. So we have about 4 minutes left for some last minute questions.
All right, so it looks like there aren't any more questions coming in right now, just a few minutes left. We're happy to hang out just in case you have any last questions. But again, thanks for being here and please feel free to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, thank you so much for attending this early morning presentation live. We're really happy to be able to share these results with you. And thanks to SBA for hosting and inviting us to present.
Yes, thank you.